Layla sat in her first-class seat, thirsty but patient. She pressed the call button and politely asked for a glass of water. The flight attendant, Ms. Caldwell, looked her in the eye and walked away. When Layla asked again, she was refused, ignored like she didn't belong. But what Ms. Caldwell didn't know? Layla's father owned the airline, and what happened next changed everything. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Layla sat quietly in her first-class seat, her hands resting on her lap as she gazed out the window. The airport runway was busy with planes taxiing in the distance, and for a moment she felt a quiet excitement. Flying first class was something she had never experienced alone before. It was a special gift from her father, a reward for her hard work in school. She wasn't the type to make a big deal out of it, so she kept to herself, listening to her music and flipping through the in-flight magazine. The flight attendant, Ms. Caldwell, moved through the aisle, greeting the passengers with a warm smile. She leaned toward a businessman, offering him a drink with a polite nod. She paused to chat with a woman wearing expensive jewelry, laughing at something she said. But when she reached Layla's row, her expression changed. The friendly smile she had given to the others disappeared. She barely looked at her before moving on. Layla didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the woman was just busy. She waited patiently as the plane took off, the engines roaring beneath her. Once they were in the air, the flight attendants began their service, moving up and down the aisle with trays of drinks. She watched as passengers around her were handed sparkling water, fresh juice, and glasses of wine. Miss Caldwell reached her row, setting a drink down for the older man sitting next to her. But before Layla could ask for anything, the attendant turned to leave. Layla hesitated, then spoke up politely. "Excuse me, may I have a glass of water, please?" The attendant turned, giving her a quick glance as if she hadn't expected to be spoken to. Her smile was tight, barely there. "We'll get to you when we can," she said coolly, then walked away without another word. Layla frowned. That was odd. She had just watched her serve several other people with no delay. Still, she decided to wait a little longer. Maybe the woman was in a rush. Minutes passed. The flight attendants continued their service, checking on the passengers in first class, refilling drinks, chatting with some of them. But Ms. Caldwell never returned to Layla's seat. She glanced around, wondering if she was imagining things. But then it happened again. A passenger across the aisle, a man in his late 50s, lifted his hand slightly, asking for another drink. Ms. Caldwell nodded immediately, pouring him a fresh glass of water without hesitation. Layla's chest tightened. She waved slightly as the attendant passed her row again. "Excuse me, could I please get some water?" Ms. Caldwell didn't slow down. This time her response was colder. "I told you we'll get to you when we can." And just like that, she was gone. Layla's fingers curled slightly against her seat's armrest. She had been polite. She had waited. She had asked twice. But it was clear now. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't that the attendant was too busy. It was something else. She looked around at the other passengers. A few had noticed. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided looking in her direction altogether. No one said anything. No one asked why a simple request for water was being ignored. Her stomach twisted. Layla reached for her phone and quickly typed a message to her father. "Dad, I asked for water twice. The flight attendant is ignoring me." She stared at the screen for a second before hitting send. She wasn't sure what he could do. The plane was already in the air. There was no way for him to step in now, or so she thought. Her phone buzzed almost instantly. "What's your flight number?" She quickly checked her ticket and sent it back. A moment later, another message appeared. "Sit tight, don't worry." Layla didn't know exactly what he meant, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over, not even close. Layla stared at her phone screen, reading her father's message again. "Sit tight. Don't worry." He always knew how to handle things, but how could he do anything from thousands of miles away? She slipped the phone back into her bag, her fingers tapping lightly against her armrest. She wasn't the type to cause a scene, but something about this situation gnawed at her. Ms. Caldwell continued her rounds, passing by Layla's row several times, tending to other passengers with the same warm, attentive service she had refused to give her. Layla watched as she poured a glass of wine for a well-dressed woman in front of her, then handed a small bottle of sparkling water to a man wearing expensive cufflinks. There was no hesitation, no delay. Layla clenched her jaw. The message was clear. Ms. Caldwell had decided that she wasn't worth the same courtesy as everyone else. A soft voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you okay?" She turned to see the man seated beside her, an older gentleman with graying hair, dressed in a navy blazer. He had been quiet for most of the flight, but now he was looking at her with a concerned expression. Layla forced a small smile. "I'm fine." The man hesitated, glancing toward the flight attendant before leaning slightly closer. "I saw what happened." His voice was low, careful. "She's ignoring you on purpose, isn't she?" Layla swallowed. She didn't want to admit it, but the truth was obvious. "I think so," she murmured. The man sighed, shaking his head. "Unbelievable." He straightened in his seat. "Do you want me to say something?" Layla considered it. Maybe if someone else pointed it out, Ms. Caldwell would have no choice but to treat her fairly. But as she looked around the cabin, she noticed something. Most people were pretending not to see. A few had been watching, but as soon as she met their gaze, they quickly turned away. No one wanted to get involved. Layla let out a slow breath. "No, it's okay." The man frowned, but he didn't push. He gave her a nod before settling back into his seat. Layla shifted slightly, glancing out the window. The plane was soaring through the sky, smooth and steady. She had always loved flying, but at this moment she felt small, like she didn't belong. Her phone vibrated again. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." Layla's brows pulled together. How could he handle it from so far away? She had no idea what her father was planning, but one thing was certain. Ms. Caldwell had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Layla placed her phone back in her bag, her mind racing. Her father's words were always firm, never exaggerated. If he said he would handle it, he meant it. But how? She glanced toward the front of the cabin where Ms. Caldwell was busy chatting with another passenger, her polished smile intact. More time passed. The attendants were making another round, refilling drinks and offering snacks. Layla sat still, waiting, wondering if Ms. Caldwell would at least pretend to make things right. But when she walked by, she didn't even glance in Layla's direction. Enough. Layla pressed the call button above her seat. A soft chime rang out, catching the attention of a younger flight attendant, a woman named Mia. She had been working quietly in the background, avoiding the authoritative presence of Ms. Caldwell. Mia approached with a polite smile. "Yes, miss, how can I help you?" Layla hesitated for a second before speaking. "I asked for water a while ago. I never got it." Mia blinked, glancing toward Ms. Caldwell, who was standing near the galley, still laughing at something a passenger had said. The younger attendant shifted uncomfortably. "You weren't served?" she asked, her voice careful. Layla shook her head. "Number I asked twice." Mia's eyes flickered with something. Hesitation, maybe even guilt. It was clear she knew exactly why Layla had been ignored. She turned quickly toward the galley, stepping past Ms. Caldwell. Layla watched as Mia reached for a bottle of water, but before she could grab it, Ms. Caldwell suddenly spoke. "Leave it." Her voice was quiet, but sharp. Mia froze. "She asked for water," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Caldwell didn't even look in her direction. "I said leave it." Layla felt her stomach tighten as she watched the exchange, her hands curled into fists in her lap. It wasn't just rudeness anymore. This was intentional. Mia hesitated, then glanced back at Layla. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but then, with a small nod, she turned away, walking back to the front of the plane empty-handed. Layla's pulse quickened. She had been ignored. Again. Her fingers itched to reach for her phone, to text her father and tell him it had gotten worse. But before she could, the intercom crackled to life. "Ms. Caldwell, please report to the cockpit immediately." The flight attendant stiffened. For the first time, her expression faltered. Layla could see it in her body language, the slight hesitation, the tension in her shoulders. Passengers glanced up, momentarily distracted by the announcement. Ms. Caldwell set down her tray and straightened her uniform before making her way to the front of the plane. Layla followed her movements, her heartbeat steady but expectant. Her father had done something, and whatever it was, Ms. Caldwell wasn't going to like it. Ms. Caldwell walked toward the cockpit with stiff, measured steps. Layla could tell by the way she held her shoulders, tight and rigid, that she wasn't expecting good news. Layla's fingers gripped the armrest of her seat as she watched the flight attendant disappear behind the cockpit door. A quiet murmur spread through the first-class cabin. The passengers might not have known exactly what was happening, but they knew something was wrong. The older man next to her leaned slightly toward her. That wasn't a normal announcement. Layla nodded. "I don't think so either." She shifted in her seat, her thoughts racing. What had her father done? Had he called the airline? Had he spoken to someone on the ground? How much power did he have to change things mid-flight? Several minutes passed. The first-class cabin was unusually quiet now. Even the passengers who had ignored her earlier seemed aware that something was off. Then the door to the cockpit opened. Ms. Caldwell stepped out, and Layla could see the change in her face immediately. The confidence was gone. The smugness had vanished. Her usually sharp expression was now blank. No forced smile, no warmth, nothing. She walked back toward the galley, but her movements weren't as smooth as before. They were stiff, hesitant. Layla could almost see the weight pressing on her shoulders. A moment later, the intercom crackled again. "This is your captain speaking. We appreciate your patience during our flight today. If any passenger requires further assistance, our crew is here to ensure a comfortable journey for everyone." The words seemed ordinary, professional, but there was a tone beneath them, something unspoken, something meant for a specific person in the cabin. Layla didn't move. She didn't need to. She waited. Ms. Caldwell reappeared in the aisle, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The warmth she had once shown the other passengers was gone. She stopped at Layla's row, her jaw tight, her voice quieter than before. "I apologize for the delay," she said, the words forced. "Would you like some water now?" Layla tilted her head slightly. "Now?" She glanced down the aisle where some passengers were pretending not to listen, while others were outright staring. Even Mia, the younger flight attendant, was watching carefully from a distance. Layla turned back to Ms. Caldwell, her voice steady. "I asked for water a long time ago," she said. "Why are you offering it now?" A flicker of something crossed Ms. Caldwell's face. Frustration, embarrassment. Layla didn't let her off the hook. "You served everyone else," she continued, keeping her voice calm. "You ignored me, even when I asked twice." Ms. Caldwell's throat bobbed slightly. It was a misunderstanding. Layla let the silence sit between them for a moment. Then finally she shook her head. "No, it wasn't." Ms. Caldwell pressed her lips together. "Would you like the water or not?" Layla held her gaze for a long second, then leaned back in her seat. "No, thank you." A few people shifted in their seats, murmuring under their breath. Ms. Caldwell inhaled sharply through her nose, nodded once, then turned on her heel and walked away. Layla didn't take her eyes off her as she disappeared toward the galley. Whatever had happened in that cockpit had shaken her, but this wasn't over yet. Not even close. Layla remained still, her heartbeat steady as she watched Ms. Caldwell disappear back into the galley. The tension in the cabin was thick, stretching across the rows of seats like an invisible thread. Passengers who had ignored her earlier now exchanged uncertain glances as if sensing that something much bigger was happening. The older man next to her let out a low chuckle. "Smart move," he muttered. Layla didn't respond. She didn't feel like she had won anything, at least not yet. Her phone vibrated in her lap. She picked it up and saw her father's message. she apologized. Layla's fingers hovered over the screen before she typed back. She tried. It didn't sound real. A few seconds later, another message appeared. Good. You don't have to accept fake apologies. Layla exhaled slowly. He understood. He always did. But before she could put her phone away, another chime rang through the cabin. A different voice, calm, professional, came over the intercom. Ms. Caldwell, please report to the front immediately. Layla looked up. The passengers around her shifted again, their curiosity piqued. First, she had been called to the cockpit. Now, another announcement. This wasn't normal. Ms. Caldwell reappeared, walking quickly, her posture stiff. She disappeared through the curtains leading to the front of the plane. Layla tapped her fingers against her knee. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel it. Something was unraveling. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The murmur of passengers filled the space, the tension lingering. Even the other flight attendants seemed uneasy, whispering among themselves near the galley. Then suddenly, the curtains parted. But this time it wasn't Ms. Caldwell who stepped out. It was the captain. The whispering stopped. The tall, broad-shouldered man scanned the cabin before settling his gaze on Layla. His expression was neutral, but his eyes carried weight, authority, understanding. He walked toward her row. Layla sat up straighter, her breath caught in her throat. He stopped beside her seat, then spoke in a voice that was just loud enough for the passengers nearby to hear. I want to personally apologize for the way you've been treated on this flight. A stunned silence followed. Layla blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't expecting this. The captain continued, his voice firm but calm. I've been made aware of the situation, and I assure you it is being addressed. He hesitated, then added, This airline does not tolerate behavior like this. Layla felt the weight of every passenger's gaze on her, but she kept her expression steady. The captain glanced toward the galley where the flight attendant stood frozen. His gaze was sharp. Ms. Caldwell will no longer be serving on this flight. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Layla's stomach flipped. Did he just say? Before she could process it, the captain straightened. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. He gave her a small nod, then turned and walked away, disappearing behind the curtain. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere in the cabin, a slow, deliberate clap echoed. Layla turned her head. The older man next to her smirked and gave her a single nod before clapping again. And then, one by one, other passengers joined in. Layla didn't smile, but she felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about water anymore. This was about what happened when people like Ms. Caldwell thought they could act without consequences. And right now, the entire plane had just witnessed what consequences looked like. The sound of clapping faded, but the shift in the cabin remained. Layla felt it in the air, the way people were suddenly more aware, more attentive. The very passengers who had ignored what happened earlier were now stealing glances at her, whispering behind their hands. Some looked embarrassed. Others seemed uncomfortable. No one had spoken up when Ms. Caldwell refused her water, but now that they knew who she was connected to, they were paying attention. Layla didn't react. She simply exhaled and sat back in her seat. She wasn't here to make a scene. She had asked for something simple, respect. And now the very people who had treated her like she was invisible were forced to acknowledge her presence. The curtain at the front of the plane shifted, and Ms. Caldwell emerged. Layla's breath slowed. She had expected the flight attendant to be furious, to hold her head high and pretend she had done nothing wrong. But the woman walking toward her wasn't the same one who had dismissed her earlier. Ms. Caldwell's face was pale, her expression blank. There was no arrogance, no authority in the way she carried herself. Her uniform, usually neat and crisp, looked slightly stiff now, like it was weighing her down. She stopped beside Layla's seat, standing in the aisle, gripping her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Passengers were watching. Layla tilted her head slightly, waiting. Ms. Caldwell took a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost strained. I want to apologize for the way I treated you. Layla didn't blink. The cabin was silent, every ear tuned into the conversation. Ms. Caldwell swallowed, forcing herself to continue. I should have served you when you asked. I shouldn't have ignored you. It was unprofessional and it was wrong. Her voice wavered slightly on the last word. Layla studied her carefully. There was a difference between an apology and a real apology. The first one was for show. The second one was felt. She wasn't sure which one this was yet. Layla finally spoke, her tone calm. You didn't just ignore me. You refused me. A flicker of something passed over Ms. Caldwell's face. Shame, regret. I know, she admitted barely above a whisper. And I was wrong for that. Layla kept her voice steady. Why did you do it? Ms. Caldwell's lips parted slightly, as if she wasn't expecting the question. She hesitated. A few passengers glanced at each other, waiting for her answer. Layla didn't rush her. She wanted to see if Ms. Caldwell was willing to own up to it. Not just say she was sorry, but actually understand what she had done. Finally, the flight attendant exhaled, closing her eyes for half a second before looking at Layla again. I don't have a good excuse, she admitted. I made an assumption about you and it was wrong. That was it. No excuses. No trying to shift the blame. Just a truthful statement. Layla let the words settle between them. She could see that saying them wasn't easy for Miss Caldwell. A quiet beat passed before Layla gave a slow nod. Okay. Ms. Caldwell blinked. Layla didn't say, I forgive you. Because that wasn't something that came instantly. That was something that had to be earned. She wasn't here to make her feel better, but she was here to make her think. Ms. Caldwell gave a stiff nod before stepping back. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the galley, disappearing once more. The weight in the cabin shifted again. Some passengers looked relieved. Others still avoided eye contact, unsure of what to do. Layla reached for her phone and sent a quick message to her father. She apologized, but I don't think this is over yet. A few seconds later, her screen lit up. It's not. Layla inhaled slowly, locking her phone. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to happen in the air. It was going to happen when they landed. Layla adjusted in her seat, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened settle over her. The first-class cabin was still uncomfortably quiet, the tension lingering like a heavy cloud. People had watched Ms. Caldwell apologize, yet no one truly knew what to do with that moment. Some passengers looked at their screens, pretending they hadn't witnessed the exchange. Others kept stealing glances in her direction, their expressions unreadable. Layla wasn't surprised. They had all seen what happened earlier but had chosen to stay silent. Now, when the consequences had finally reached Ms. Caldwell, they suddenly wanted to pay attention. She let out a slow breath, unlocking her phone again. Her father's last message stared back at her. It's not. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed. What did you do? The response came within seconds. I made a phone call. Layla frowned slightly. A phone call? That could mean anything, but she had a feeling it wasn't just a complaint to customer service. Her father never did things halfway. When he handled something, it was handled completely. She was about to respond when she noticed movement at the front of the cabin. The younger flight attendant, Mia, hesitated near the galley before walking toward Layla's row. She looked nervous, her hands clasped together as she approached. Layla watched her carefully. Mia stopped just beside her seat, lowering her voice so only Layla and the older man sitting next to her could hear. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened, she said softly. Layla studied her, unsure of her intentions. You weren't the one who ignored me. Mia's lips pressed together before she nodded. No, but I saw it, and I should have said something. She swallowed. I almost did, but... She trailed off, glancing toward the galley where Ms. Caldwell had disappeared. Layla understood immediately. Mia had been afraid to step in. Ms. Caldwell had authority over her, and calling her out could have easily backfired. Still, Layla couldn't help but wonder. If her father hadn't stepped in, would Mia have spoken up at all? Layla kept her voice even. Why are you saying this now? Mia shifted on her feet. Because I was wrong too, she admitted. I didn't ignore you, but I let it happen, and that's just as bad. There was something honest about the way she said it. It wasn't forced or rehearsed like Ms. Caldwell's apology had been. Layla nodded slightly. Okay. Mia hesitated before speaking again. When we land, things might get intense. Layla narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Mia exhaled, glancing around before lowering her voice even more. I don't know exactly what your dad did, but the crew just got a message from corporate. She shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Caldwell is being met at the gate by airline executives. Layla's pulse quickened. Executives? That wasn't a simple disciplinary talk. That was serious. Mia straightened, looking like she wanted to say more but was afraid to. Instead, she simply gave Layla a small nod, before stepping back toward the galley. Layla's mind raced. Her father wasn't playing around. Whatever phone call he had made, it had reached the highest level of the airline. And if executives were involved, it meant one thing. This wasn't just about one bad flight attendant anymore. This was about the company itself. Her stomach tightened. She wasn't sure what was about to happen. But one thing was clear. Ms. Caldwell had no idea what was waiting for her when the plane landed. Layla's grip tightened on her phone as she processed what Mia had just told her. Executives were waiting at the gate. That meant her father's call had shaken something at the very core of the airline. It wasn't just about her being ignored anymore. It wasn't just about Ms. Caldwell's behavior. This had turned into something much bigger. Layla turned her head slightly, catching a glimpse of the flight attendants near the galley. They were whispering to one another, their movements tense. Even the ones who had seemed indifferent before were now looking uneasy. She glanced at the older man beside her. He was watching the crew as well, his sharp gaze following every subtle shift in their behavior. Something tells me your father doesn't mess around, he murmured. Layla exhaled slowly. He never does. The man smirked, nodding approvingly. Good. Layla's eyes flickered back to the galley just in time to see Ms. Caldwell emerge once again. She walked slowly, her usual confident stride noticeably stiffer. The tension in her shoulders was clear now. She felt the shift in power. But what Layla noticed most was the way the other flight attendants subtly stepped aside when she passed. Ms. Caldwell still held authority, but she was alone now. The support, the silent approval from her co-workers, it had vanished. She turned toward Layla's row, and for a moment it looked like she was about to say something. But then she caught sight of the passengers still watching her, and she hesitated. Instead of stopping, she turned quickly and walked toward the galley again. Layla wasn't sure if she had been about to apologize again, or if she had just wanted to justify herself. Either way, she had lost the moment. Another vibration from Layla's phone pulled her attention away. Her father. We land in 20 minutes. Stay in your seat when we taxi to the gate. Layla's breath slowed. Why? She typed quickly. What's happening? His response was immediate. Just wait. You'll see. Layla swallowed. She wasn't sure what he had set into motion, but she knew better than to doubt him. The intercom crackled again, and the captain's voice came through, smooth and composed. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened, and your tray tables are in their upright positions. We'll be landing shortly. A quiet shuffle went through the cabin as passengers adjusted themselves. Some stretched. Some sighed, relieved that the flight was almost over. But Layla didn't move. She could feel it now. This wasn't just a normal landing. Something was waiting for them at that gate. And Ms. Caldwell? She was walking straight into it. The plane began its steady descent, the familiar hum of the engines shifting as the aircraft prepared to land. The sky outside was turning a soft shade of gold, the sun dipping lower on the horizon. Layla barely noticed. Her thoughts were focused on what was waiting at the gate. She gripped the armrest lightly, keeping her eyes forward, though her mind raced with questions. What had her father done? Who exactly was waiting for them? What would happen to Miss Caldwell? A glance toward the galley told her that the flight crew was just as tense as she was. Ms. Caldwell stood near the beverage station, her back unnaturally straight, her hands gripping the counter. The other attendants kept their distance, speaking in hushed voices, throwing occasional glances in her direction. It was as if they knew she was in trouble, but weren't willing to step in to help. Layla turned back to her phone, half expecting another message from her father. But there was nothing. He had told her to wait, and she knew better than to push for more information. The plane touched down smoothly, a soft jolt running through the cabin as the wheels met the runway. A few passengers clapped quietly, an old habit some people still had, even on routine flights. Layla, however, remained still. She could sense it. Something was coming. As the aircraft slowed, rolling toward the terminal, a voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. The local time is 5:42 p.m. Please remain seated until we have reached the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. On behalf of our crew, we thank you for flying with us today." People shifted, unbuckling their belts despite the announcement, eager to stand and grab their bags. The first-class cabin was no different, except for the air of unease that still hung over it. Layla's fingers drummed against her knee, watching as Ms. Caldwell turned to face the exit. Her posture was still stiff, but now there was something else in her expression, something Layla hadn't seen before. Fear. A soft ding signaled the final approach to the gate. The plane came to a full stop, and for a second everything was still. Then the front door opened. 2 airline officials stepped onto the aircraft. Layla recognized the type immediately, high-ranking executives. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions unreadable. But the way they walked, the quiet authority in their movements, made it clear. They weren't here for a routine check. Passengers murmured in confusion, some craning their necks to see what was happening. Even the first-class travelers who had barely paid attention before were now watching with interest. Ms. Caldwell straightened, schooling her features into something neutral, but Layla could see the way her fingers twitched slightly at her sides. One of the executives, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a sharp, polished look, scanned the cabin briefly before his gaze settled on Ms. Caldwell. "Ms. Caldwell." His voice was calm but firm. The flight attendant stiffened. "Yes, sir." The man glanced at his colleague, a woman with a clipboard in hand. She nodded slightly before the man continued. "You'll need to step off the aircraft with us immediately." A ripple of surprise moved through the first-class cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances. A few even whispered among themselves. Ms. Caldwell hesitated. I don't understand. Is there a problem?" The female executive, the one holding the clipboard, gave her a pointed look. "We'll discuss that in the terminal. Please gather your belongings and come with us." Layla didn't move, didn't blink. Ms. Caldwell's hands tightened at her sides. "I still have duties to finish before—" "Now, Ms. Caldwell." The man's voice left no room for argument. For a long moment, the flight attendant stood frozen. Then, with a visible swallow, she nodded stiffly and stepped toward the galley to grab her bag. Layla's chest felt tight, though she wasn't sure why. She wasn't surprised. She had known this was coming. But the most shocking part was the silence. Not a single one of Ms. Caldwell's colleagues spoke up for her. None of them asked what was happening. None of them stepped forward to defend her. She was completely alone. Ms. Caldwell's heels clicked lightly against the floor as she walked toward the exit. The executive stepped aside, allowing her to pass through the open doorway. And just like that, she was gone. For the first time since the plane had taken off, Layla let out a slow breath. It was over, or at least, this part was, because Layla knew her father. And if Ms. Caldwell thought this was the end of the consequences, she was wrong. The tension in the first-class cabin remained, thick and unshakable, even after Ms. Caldwell disappeared down the jet bridge. No one moved, no one spoke. The passengers who had quietly observed the situation unfold were still gripping their armrests, processing what they had just witnessed. Layla didn't turn to watch Ms. Caldwell leave. She didn't need to. The flight attendant's fate had been sealed the moment she made the choice to treat her differently. This wasn't just about a single glass of water. It was about who had the power in the room. And right now, Ms. Caldwell had none. The flight attendants who remained on board quickly composed themselves, shifting back into their usual professional mannerisms. But the air between them was strained. They had spent the entire flight either ignoring Ms. Caldwell's behavior or silently enabling it. Now, as the doors to the terminal loomed ahead, it was clear that no one wanted to be caught on the wrong side of this situation. Layla reached for her phone again. "She's gone." Her father's response was instant. "I know." Layla blinked. He knew. Before she could type a response, another message followed. "Stay in your seat. Security will escort you off the plane." Layla frowned slightly. Security. That was unexpected. She didn't feel unsafe, but something told her her father wasn't taking any risks. He wasn't just handling this like an incident. He was handling it like an operation. A few minutes later, the soft ding of the seatbelt sign turning off echoed through the cabin. Passengers immediately shot up, reaching for their overhead bags, eager to exit the plane. But Layla didn't move. She followed her father's instructions and stayed put. The older man who had been sitting beside her noticed. He gave her a knowing look before muttering, "Smart girl." She simply nodded. Then, they arrived. Two uniformed security officers stepped onto the plane, moving with quiet authority. Unlike the airline executives who had escorted Ms. Caldwell away, these men weren't here to handle corporate policy. They were here for protection. Passengers paused in their movements, staring as the officers scanned the cabin. One of them, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, met Layla's gaze before stepping forward. "Miss Layla?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." He gestured toward the exit. "We've been asked to escort you to the terminal." The whispers started instantly. People turned their heads, confusion rippling through the cabin. Some passengers looked at each other, murmuring in hushed tones. The same people who had ignored her earlier were now fascinated by her presence. Layla exhaled and calmly grabbed her small bag, slinging it over her shoulder. She stood, her movement steady, her expression unreadable. As she walked toward the front of the cabin, the other first-class passengers shifted awkwardly, parting to let her pass. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with quiet shame. They all knew why this was happening, and yet none of them had spoken up when it mattered. Layla didn't spare them a second glance. She stepped off the plane, security walking beside her, their presence alone making it clear. She was not just another passenger. The moment she entered the jet bridge, she saw them. A group of high-level airline executives waiting just beyond the terminal doors. Their suits were pressed, their expressions serious, but standing in the center of them all was her father. Layla felt her pulse slow, steadying herself. He wasn't dressed like the others. There was no suit, no stiff posture. He stood with the kind of confidence that didn't need fancy titles or corporate jargon. The second he saw her, his expression softened, but only slightly. She walked toward him, and as she did, the airline executive stepped aside. Her father extended his hand in a brief but firm motion, and she immediately placed hers in his. That simple gesture was enough. She didn't have to say anything. She was safe. She was heard. But more importantly, this wasn't over. Not yet. Layla's fingers curled around her father's hand for only a moment before he gave it a small, reassuring squeeze. No words were exchanged yet, but they didn't need to be. His presence alone was enough to tell her everything. He had been watching, he had been waiting, and now he was here to finish what he started. She released his hand as he turned to the group of airline executives surrounding them. There were 4 of them, 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in sleek business attire, their faces carefully composed. But despite their neutral expressions, Layla could see the nervous energy beneath their polished appearances. Her father's gaze swept across the group before he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I assume you all understand why we're standing here right now." The executives stiffened slightly, glancing at each other. The man standing closest to him, a middle-aged executive with neatly combed silver hair, cleared his throat before responding. "Mr. Khan, we received your call. The situation is being handled internally." Her father's expression didn't change. "Handled?" The executive hesitated. "Yes, Ms. Caldwell has been escorted off the aircraft, and a full internal review will—" "You're misunderstanding me," her father interrupted, his voice still dangerously calm. "I didn't come here to hear about your review process." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that none of them were prepared for this kind of confrontation. Not face-to-face, not with him. Layla knew exactly why. Her father wasn't just a powerful businessman. He wasn't just someone who owned a major stake in the airline. He was someone who built his empire from the ground up. Every industry he touched, aviation, technology, infrastructure, had been shaped by his presence. His name wasn't just respected, it was feared by those who underestimated him. And right now, these executives were realizing their mistake. The female executive, who had remained silent until now, finally stepped forward. She adjusted the folder in her hands and spoke with the careful precision of someone who knew they were on thin ice. "Mr. Khan, we understand the severity of this incident. We've already begun taking steps to ensure this does not happen again." Layla's father tilted his head slightly. "And what steps would those be?" The woman cleared her throat. "Ms. Caldwell has been placed on immediate suspension, pending termination. We will also be conducting a re-evaluation of our first-class training procedures, and will be implementing mandatory bias training for all flight crew members moving forward." Layla studied their faces carefully. They were offering solutions, but not because they wanted to. Because they had to. Because they knew that this was no longer just a simple complaint from a passenger. This was a public relations disaster waiting to happen. Her father exhaled through his nose, his sharp gaze locked onto them. "That's a start," he said. "But it's not enough." The executives tensed. The silver-haired man hesitated before asking, "What else do you expect, sir?" Layla already knew the answer before her father even spoke. "Accountability," he said. "And not just from one flight attendant, from your entire leadership team." Silence. The executives looked visibly uncomfortable now. This was no longer about Ms. Caldwell. This was about them. Her father continued, his voice measured, controlled. "Let's be very clear. I have invested millions into this airline. I have sat at the same tables as your board members. I have ensured that your company remains profitable, efficient, and respectable." He let the words hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "And yet, my daughter was humiliated by someone who believed she didn't deserve a basic level of human respect." Layla felt a chill roll through her spine at the cold authority in his tone. The executives had no argument. They knew there was nothing they could say to justify what had happened. Her father took a slow step closer, his presence alone making them straighten. "So let's make something clear. This isn't just about one bad employee. It's about the culture you've allowed to exist on your aircrafts." The silver-haired executive swallowed visibly. We understand, Mr. Khan. We'll ensure—" Her father held up a hand, stopping him. "No, you don't understand. But you will." He turned slightly, glancing toward a man who had been standing just behind the executives, silent up until now. A lawyer. One of his lawyers. The executives' faces paled slightly. Now they understood. Her father looked back at them. "You'll be receiving a full legal statement by the end of the day. It will outline the corrective actions I expect from this airline, not just for my daughter's case, but for every passenger who has been discriminated against under your watch." The silence was deafening. Layla felt the air shift, the weight of power changing hands. This wasn't just about Ms. Caldwell anymore. This was about fixing the system. Her father looked at her then, his expression softening just slightly. "Are you ready to go?" he asked. Layla nodded, gripping the strap of her bag. "Yeah." Her father turned back to the executives one last time. His final words were simple, but they carried the force of a storm. Fix your airline, or I will." Then, without another word, he placed a hand on Layla's back and led her away, past the executives, past the murmuring airport staff, past the bystanders who had been watching in stunned silence. Layla didn't look back. She didn't need to, because she already knew. This wasn't the end of the story. This was only the beginning. Layla walked beside her father, matching his steady pace as they left the cluster of executives behind. Even as they moved further away, she could feel the weight of their stares pressing into her back. They had never expected to be confronted like that. Not so directly, not so publicly. Her father didn't say anything as they made their way toward the private exit of the terminal, his expression calm, unreadable. His suit jacket rested neatly on his shoulders, his movements controlled, as if nothing that had just happened had affected him. But Layla knew better. She knew his silence wasn't indifference. It was calculation. He had done exactly what he came here to do. Make sure they understood that this wasn't something they could sweep under the rug. And now he was thinking about his next move. Layla exhaled slowly, gripping the strap of her bag as she kept walking. The airport was buzzing with activity. Passengers rushing through terminals, announcements echoing overhead, families reuniting near baggage claim. But in their corner of the airport, things were different. Here, people watched them. Security personnel, airline staff, even a few bystanders who had overheard the confrontation. They all turned their heads as she and her father passed. Layla knew why. Most of them weren't used to seeing a man like him, a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention, a man who walked into a room and forced everyone to listen. And then there was her, the girl who had sat in her seat and said nothing when she was ignored, the girl who had refused to accept a fake apology, the girl who had become the center of a problem the airline had tried to pretend didn't exist. Her phone buzzed in her hand, pulling her thoughts away from the noise around her. She glanced down and saw a message from an unknown number. "I don't expect you to respond, but I needed to say this. I'm sorry, and not because I got caught, because I was wrong." Layla stared at the screen for a long moment. She didn't need to ask who it was from. Ms. Caldwell. For a second, she considered ignoring it. After everything that had happened, what did an apology even mean? But then she thought about what her father had said. Accountability. Layla didn't believe in easy forgiveness, but she believed in growth. She quickly typed a response before she could second-guess herself. "I hope you never do this to anyone else." She hit send and locked her phone. That was all she had to say. Her father led her past security toward a sleek black car waiting just outside the private terminal entrance. The driver stood beside the vehicle, holding the door open, giving them a polite nod. Layla slid inside first, settling into the leather seat as her father followed. The door shut. The noise of the airport faded instantly, replaced by the quiet hum of the car's air conditioning. For the first time since she stepped onto that plane, she felt calm. Her father loosened his tie slightly before glancing at her. "Are you okay?" Layla nodded. "Yeah, I think so." He studied her, as if deciding whether he believed her or not. "You handled yourself well." She smirked slightly. "I didn't do much." Her father gave a rare chuckle. "You did more than you think." He leaned back against the seat, looking out the window as the car pulled away from the airport. "And you forced people to see something they didn't want to see." Layla considered that. She hadn't planned for any of this to happen. She had just wanted a glass of water. She had just wanted to be treated like everyone else. But instead, she became the reason people had to face something uncomfortable. Layla glanced at her father. "What happens now?" He didn't hesitate. "Now, we make sure it doesn't happen again." Layla exhaled, feeling a strange sense of relief settle in her chest. Because for the first time since she boarded that flight, she knew that she wasn't just a passenger who had been mistreated. She was part of something bigger. And this was only the beginning of the changes that were coming. The city skyline blurred past as the car moved steadily through the evening traffic. Layla sat back in her seat, her hands folded in her lap, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. From being ignored on the plane to watching her father dismantle an entire corporate team in a single conversation, it still didn't feel real. Her father, Malik Khan, was scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable. She had seen this look before, the look of a man who was still working, even when everything seemed finished. Layla shifted slightly. "Are you really going to push for policy changes?" Her father didn't look up. "I don't push," he said simply. "I decide." She raised an eyebrow. "So, what's the plan?" Now he looked at her. "What do you think the plan should be?" Layla hesitated. She wasn't expecting that question. Her father was a strategist, a businessman. He was used to handling things his way. He wasn't the type to ask for opinions unless he genuinely wanted them. She exhaled, gathering her thoughts. "This isn't just about one bad flight attendant," she said. "You said it yourself. This is about the culture of the airline." Her father nodded slightly, waiting. Layla continued. "Firing Ms. Caldwell won't fix it. There are other people like her working on other flights, making people feel small, like they don't belong." He didn't interrupt. "So if you really want to fix this, you can't just punish one person. You have to force the airline to change." Her father's gaze sharpened. "How?" Layla bit the inside of her cheek, thinking. Then it hit her. "You control a percentage of their shares, right?" Her father gave a small, approving nod. 14%. Layla sat up straighter. "That's enough to have a voice. Enough to demand a change in leadership if they don't take this seriously." A small smirk tugged at the corner of her father's mouth. "Go on." Layla's confidence grew. "You make them commit to real reforms, bias training, stricter oversight, a way for passengers to report discrimination in real time. And you don't let them do it quietly. You make them announce it publicly so they can't back out later." She paused, then added, "And if they don't?" Her father set his phone down. "Then I make an example out of them." Layla swallowed. She had always known her father was powerful, but watching him work up close was different. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a force. "Are they going to fight it?" she asked. Her father exhaled through his nose. "At first, yes. They'll try to negotiate, pretend they're making changes when they're really stalling. That's what corporations do when they think the problem will go away on its own." He leaned back against the seat. "But they won't expect me to push this far, and they definitely won't expect that it's coming from you." Layla frowned. "Me?" Her father nodded. "This fight started with you. If I force the airline to change, it'll look like a power move, a business deal." He met her gaze. "But if you stand up and say something, it becomes a message." Layla's pulse quickened. "You mean publicly?" Her father studied her carefully. "Do you want to?" She hesitated. Did she? Layla had never been the type to seek attention. She was comfortable staying in her lane, doing her own thing. But now, after what had happened, she wasn't sure she could go back to being quiet. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, ignored, treated like they didn't belong. Layla took a slow breath. "If I speak up, will it actually change anything?" Her father's expression was serious. "Only if you mean it." Layla thought about Ms. Caldwell, about the way the passengers had pretended not to notice, about the way the airline executives had only acted because they were afraid of her father. She thought about how easy it would have been for none of this to happen. And then she thought about what would happen if she walked away now. Her fingers curled into a fist. "I want to do it," she said firmly. Her father nodded, a quiet approval in his eyes. "Then let's make them listen." The car moved steadily through the city, its engine humming softly beneath them. Layla's mind was racing, but her body felt still, almost weightless. She had made a decision, one that could change more than just her own life. Speaking up meant stepping into a space she had never occupied before. It meant becoming the face of a problem that many people wanted to pretend didn't exist. It meant confronting the silence. Her father tapped his fingers lightly against the armrest, deep in thought. Layla could tell he was already working through the next steps in his mind, mapping out every move before the airline even had a chance to react. She shifted in her seat. "How do we start?" He looked at her, studying her for a moment before answering. "We control the narrative," he said simply. "We don't wait for them to spin it into something smaller than it is. We get ahead of them." Layla nodded, waiting for him to continue. Her father picked up his phone, scrolling for a second before showing her the screen. It was an email draft addressed to a national news outlet. Subject: Passenger Discrimination Incident. Statement from Layla Khan. Her breath caught. "You're already drafting a press statement?" Her father gave her a pointed look. "You think they aren't?" Layla exhaled. He was right. The airline was probably already working on their own version of events, crafting words that would make them seem proactive, while minimizing what had actually happened. She leaned closer, scanning the text he had written. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't dramatic. It was factual, clear, and impossible to ignore. It detailed what had happened on the flight, how Ms. Caldwell had deliberately refused her service, how the situation had escalated to the point where executives had to get involved. But most importantly, it outlined the systemic issue, the culture within the airline that had allowed this behavior to exist in the first place. It ended with a single sentence that sent chills down Layla's spine. "This is not an isolated incident, and if this airline is truly committed to serving all passengers equally, then it is time for them to prove it." Layla pulled back slightly, letting the weight of those words settle in her chest. Her father watched her reaction. "This statement will make waves," he said. "It will get people talking." Layla knew what he wasn't saying. It would also make her a target. Not everyone would want to hear this. Some people would call it an overreaction. Some would say it was just one bad employee and not a reflection of anything bigger. Others, the worst kind of people, would try to twist the story, make it seem like she had deserved it somehow. Her stomach tightened, but she refused to let fear be the thing that stopped her. She nodded, her voice steady. "Send it." Her father didn't hesitate. He pressed send. It was done. Layla let out a slow breath, but before she could fully process it, his phone buzzed in his hand. Her father glanced down, his lips twitching slightly. "That was fast." Layla raised an eyebrow. "What?" He turned the screen toward her. The airline's CEO was calling. Layla's pulse jumped. The CEO. Not an assistant, not a board member, the head of the entire airline. Her father gave her a knowing look before answering the call, putting it on speaker. "Malik," a deep voice greeted, forced and professional. "I was just about to reach out to you." Her father smirked slightly. "You're a little late." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line before the CEO continued. "We've been reviewing the situation. I want to personally apologize to Layla. What happened on that flight was unacceptable." Layla stared at the phone, but she said nothing. This wasn't the moment to accept an apology. This was the moment to listen. Her father leaned back against the seat. "And?" The CEO cleared his throat. "We've already started disciplinary actions against Ms. Caldwell. We're going to—" Her father cut in smoothly. "Firing her isn't enough." Another pause. "Excuse me?" Her father's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. "You're not going to fix this by making one flight attendant the scapegoat. This isn't about her. This is about your entire airline." The CEO exhaled slowly. "We understand that changes need to be made, and I assure you we are committed to—" "Then commit," Layla interrupted suddenly, her voice firmer than she expected. Silence. It was the first time she had spoken, and she felt the weight of it immediately. She wasn't just the passenger who had been ignored anymore. She was the one demanding action. The CEO hesitated before responding, his tone shifting slightly. "Layla, I understand you're upset. This isn't about how I feel," she said. "It's about how many other people this has happened to, how many times your employees have done this before and gotten away with it." Another pause. Her father smirked. She had caught him off guard. Layla didn't let him recover. If you really mean what you're saying, then put it in writing. Announce the changes. Make them public. Hold your own employees accountable, not just when a CEO's daughter is watching, but every day. There was a long silence on the other end of the call. Layla could almost hear the gears turning in the CEO's head, weighing the risk of ignoring her versus the risk of agreeing. Finally, he spoke. I'll have my team draft a public statement, he said carefully. And I'll meet with our board to discuss implementing stronger oversight on our crew policies. Layla glanced at her father. His face was unreadable, but she could see it in his eyes. He was impressed. Layla turned back to the phone. Not good enough. The CEO sighed, clearly frustrated. Then what do you want? Layla's heartbeat pounded, but she didn't hesitate. Accountability, she said. Not just for the employees, but for leadership too. If something like this happens again, it shouldn't take the CEO's daughter for you to care about it. Her father smiled slightly. There was another pause before the CEO finally relented. Fine, he said, his voice tight. We'll make the changes, publicly, and we'll ensure this never happens again. Layla exhaled slowly. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Her father gave her a nod before ending the call. For the first time since she had stepped onto that plane, Layla felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just someone who had been mistreated anymore. She was someone who had changed something. And she knew, without a doubt, that her voice had power. This wasn't just the end of a bad flight. This was the beginning of something bigger. The call ended with a quiet beep, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the car like an unspoken truth. Layla sat back in her seat, her fingers still curled around the edge of her phone, her pulse steady but heavy. Her father placed his phone on the console between them, exhaling as he drummed his fingers lightly against the leather armrest. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he glanced at her. How do you feel? Layla thought about it. The easy answer would be relieved. But was that really the truth? She had done something most people never got the chance to do. She had forced real change. The airline had no choice now. They would follow through, not because they wanted to, but because they had been backed into a corner, because she and her father had left them no other option. But at the same time, she knew this wasn't the end. Layla turned her head to look out the window, watching the city lights blur past. I don't know yet. Her father nodded, as if he expected that answer. Good, he said simply. That means you're thinking. Layla let out a quiet chuckle, shaking her head. You really don't like easy answers, do you? He smirked. No. Silence stretched between them again, but it was different this time. Not tense, not uncertain, just full. Layla felt something settle in her chest. Not relief, not satisfaction, but something stronger. Purpose. She had gone from a girl sitting quietly in her seat, being ignored, feeling powerless, to someone who had forced a billion-dollar corporation to face its own failures. She hadn't done it alone. Her father's influence had been the key that cracked the door open. But she had walked through it herself. That mattered. That was real. Her phone vibrated again, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down and saw a flood of notifications lighting up her screen. The news had already broken. CEO of major airline announces new discrimination policy after incident with passenger. We will do better. Airline under fire after passenger mistreatment sparks outrage. One passenger refused to stay silent. Now the whole industry is watching. Layla swallowed, her fingers tightening around the device. She had known this would happen. The moment her father sent that statement, the moment she spoke up on that call, the story had left her hands. People were already talking about it. And soon they would be talking about her. The idea made her stomach tighten, but she forced herself to take a breath. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? Not attention, not fame, change. She tapped on one of the articles, scrolling past the headline, past the corporate PR statements, past the official apologies. Then, she saw something she hadn't expected. Comments. Thousands of them. Layla hesitated for half a second before reading. I had a similar experience on a flight last year. I was ignored, treated like I didn't belong. But I didn't have the power to do anything about it. This girl did what so many of us wish we could. Finally, someone is holding these airlines accountable. It's about time. It's sad that it took someone with influence to make them care, but at least now they have to. Some were supportive, some were angry, some were skeptical, questioning if this would really change anything. Layla didn't know the answer to that yet. But she knew one thing. People were listening, and that meant she had a choice. She could let this moment pass, let it be just another story that fades in a few weeks. Or she could make sure the conversation didn't end here. Her father must have sensed what she was thinking, because he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. What happens next is up to you. Layla turned to face him, her heart steady now. She had never planned for this. She had never imagined herself in this position. But now that she was here, she realized something. She didn't just want change. She was ready to fight for it. She exhaled and gave her father a small, determined nod. We make sure they don't forget. Her father's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. Then let's get to work. As the car continued down the road, the city lights flashing past, Layla realized something. This had started with a glass of water, a simple request, a moment of disrespect, an act of powerlessness. But it had become so much more, and now, she wasn't powerless anymore. What do you think about what happened? Do you think the airline handled it the right way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss more stories like this.